you feel good, right? Your kids go to school alongside the other kids. You have great jobs. The doctors and lawyers and the merchants, and you're making good money, and you're respected, and you live in peace and with the community around you. The convivencia, the Spanish even came up with a name for it, right? We all get along, and it's not just that we live together and we just, I don't stand you and you can't stand me. No, we have this magical interdependence. Jews, Muslims, Christians. It's like it's the highest ideal, right? It's like what we all imagined. Everything is seemingly going well until the moment that Jews start to lose interest in their ideal, in their faith. And again, the faith is not I believe in God. It's that ideology, right? That's what we were reading about. They start to lose that. And as they start to lose that, that's when the reaction starts. So, and I think, and it kind of, it peaks with the massacre of 1391. What does it say there?
So until then, it was basically unthinkable to convert. As Jane Garber writes, when Jews faced the fury of the mobs in the Rhineland during the First and the Second Crusades, they unhesitatingly chose martyrdom.
Right.
To die.
Yeah.
Becoming an example that echoed in Jewish liturgy and shared memory. Their martyrdom was considered the norm. To not convert, given the context of long-standing Jewish tradition then, the collective conversion of nearly 100,000 Jews in 1391 is evidence of an enormous erosion of she says faith, or an enormous erosion of what they valued, of who they felt that they were.
And not only that, so you have these guys. So we talked about the nerds trying to be like the cool guys, and he's putting on the jacket, he's trying to smoke. But not only that, he starts to pick on the nerds, right? You'd think that he'd be like a cool guy, right? Like
so maybe to prove their loyalty,
exactly.
Or because they genuinely loathed being Jews. Many of these conversos, as they were called,
they have this chip on their shoulder, right? That they carry. I mean,
they became clergy.
Yeah, let's read it. 86 there, okay.
Right? Possibly in order to prove their loyalty to their new faith, or because they genuinely loathed their former one. Many conversos not only became prominent clergymen, they also developed virulent anti-Semitism. Some conversos even became very active in leading the campaign against the Jews, which culminated in the expulsion, and were among its most avid supporters. The most commonly known story, of course, is that of Thomas Torquemada, the Inquisitor General, who is said to be himself from a converso family. Cue the dramatic music. It is said that Torquemada was the nephew of a celebrated theologian and Cardinal Juan de Torquemada, who himself was a descendant of a converso.
I mean, this sounds remarkably like the story of Bernie Sanders. I don't want to be called out like a
Spiegler.
Listen, when you have this Jew trying to have the selfies with all these people who are anti-Semites, it makes you think. Yeah. Well, maybe what is he trying to do? What is he trying to prove? And again, I don't care for him. It's not about that. Whatever any person does, we're almost like not looking at the individual here, because we're trying to look at the pattern of the entire network. But to me, the parallels are just scary. It's like if this story follows through, then the next, and you could see that you would not become king, right? The Jews are never become king, but they always become second to the king, maybe head of the Inquisition, right? So if this story goes all the way through, it ends with expulsion. You have your suitcases ready, Seth?
I don't even know what to say.
In the book, there's story after story of converses. Basically, these these people who were, prominent Jews, prominent rabbis, who decide to convert, and then they don't just convert and kind of disappear into obscurity. No, they become bishops, the theological writers. They join convents. They rise to the highest ranks. They're the ones who basically become leaders, right? Theological leaders of the community. People who were Jewish, who had this belief, who had this ideal. I mean, I think it's worth reading a little bit, page 88 there, about the rapid ascent of these conversos. You would think that, they're becoming conversos, they're becoming Christian, everybody should love them, right?
So this forced and voluntary conversion liberated tens of thousands of former Jews from legal, cultural, and religious constraints that kept them a class apart when they were Jews. These Jewish conversos then entered Catholicism and Christian society vigorously, quickly penetrating the middle and upper classes and occupying the most prominent positions in the royal administration and church hierarchy. And of course, what happened? The Catholic Spaniards grew antagonistic towards the Jews. They detested those who converted. The tragic results of this paradox, concludes Roth, who wrote here, was the hostility of the masses to the new Christian elite.
The conversos.
The conversos led to the notorious purity of blood statutes, which preceded the Nazi race laws. The famous Nazi race laws. And then in 1478, the establishment of
the Spanish Inquisition. Just to remind everyone, this is also a time where Jews were then forced to wear a badge. I mean, there's so many similarities. And you would say...
And the Inquisition was paradoxically initiated and promoted by the conversos.
Veteran conversos.
I don't know if we want veteran conversos. I don't know if we want to...
Right. No.
Let's finish this.
But just basically the conclusion of this, and they write about it. All those things, the purity of blood laws, the Spanish Inquisition, did not actually target Jews themselves, but rather those that they called the crypto Jews or Marranos. The conversos
tried to assimilate.
Those who tried to assimilate, those who, even in the expulsion, and we'll see. I guess we'll get to it next. On our next episode. Even there, they say that one of the biggest kind of motivations for expelling the Jews was because they were afraid that they were going into their ranks as conversos and then turning around and trying to pull Christians out of their faith, try to pull people away from their values.
Yeah, people always think there's a Jewish conspiracy, but they don't really understand. The Jews don't even understand really what's happening.
Exactly, and
there is definitely something else happening, but and people
I'm amazed.
Sense it, but.
Yeah, people sense it. That's the thing, Seth. In one of the talks I had with a person who is pretty categorically labeled as anti-Semite, E. Michael Jones. You can see it on our YouTube channel. He talks. His main complaint. Forget about the stuff that I didn't understand that he was talking about, but the stuff that I did understand was that his main complaint was that Jews were basically they undermined the values that he saw and many Christians saw as essential to the church, family values, moral values. So it's funny, with one hand, Jews are the ones promoting morals and ethics, right? We were the one, we're championing this human rights, this and that, and yet the other hand is signing budgets for movies that go exactly against these morals and ethics, and producers who go against these ideals, and so people unwittingly just living out the worst kind of ideals that you can have, while simultaneously saying we are the people who will lead the world with the best possible ideals. That's the craziness, I think, that we're trying to overcome. So it's not about blood purity, this or that. I think there really is something that we're being shown and we refuse to see.
The most vitriolic and anti-Semitic of all conversos was undoubtedly the Grand Inquisitor Thomas de Torquemada. Although matters grew worse for both Jews and conversos as the Inquisition raged throughout Spain, the Jews remained relatively unharmed as long as they stayed within the confines of their living area and did not attempt to mingle with the Christians or the conversos. But in the eyes of Torquemada, the only option to guarantee that the conversos would not become Marranos, meaning crypto-Jews, who pretend to be avid Christians but are secretly practicing Judaism, was complete expulsion of all Jews from Spain and killing the ones who refused to leave. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were not wholly convinced that there was no alternative, but Torquemada, being the Queen's confessor for many years, had critical influence on the royal couple. Early in 1492, he managed to persuade them to issue an edict of expulsion for all Jews. The edict, which was to become known as the Alhambra Decree, was prepared very carefully and made sure all details were included and clarified. When the Jews heard that an edict of expulsion was in the making, they did their best to ward off calamity. When they could not persuade the king and queen to cancel it, they attempted to buy their freedom. There were many versions of the story of how the decision to publish the decree was finally made, but all of them depict the critical influence of Torquemada in the completion of the decree. According to the Jewish Virtual Library, Don Isaac Abarvanel offered Ferdinand and Isabella 600,000 crowns for the revocation of the Edict of Expulsion. As the story goes, Ferdinand hesitated, but was prevented from accepting the offer by Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor, who dashed into the royal presence, threw a crucifix down before the king and queen, and asked whether, like Judas, they would betray the Lord for money. Professor of history Jacob Rader Marcus came across a more dramatic depiction of the events leading to the announcement of the decree. Though the general outline and the result are the same, in his book, The Jew in the Medieval World, Professor Marcus details the events. He writes that the agreement permitting the Jews to remain in Spain on the payment of a large sum of money was almost completed when it was frustrated by the prior of Santa Cruz, Thomas de Torquemada. Quote, legend relates that Torquemada, prior of the convent of Santa Cruz, writes Marcus, he thundered with a crucifix aloft to the king and queen, Judas Iscariot sold his master for 30 pieces of silver. Your Highness would sell him anew for 30,000? Here he is, pointing to the cross. Take him and barter him away. King Ferdinand was indeed dumbfounded by the zealous speech, which foiled any hesitation he might have had about the implementation of the decree. However, what happened next was even more amazing. Marcus writes that Queen Isabella, who was present in the room when Torquemada stormed in, quote, gave an answer to the representations of Jews, similar to the sayings of King Solomon. The king's heart is in the hands of the Lord, as the rivers of water. He turns it wherever he wills. She said, furthermore, do you believe that this comes upon you from us? The Lord has put this thing into the heart of the king. Subsequently, concludes Marcus, the Jews saw that there was evil determined against them by the king, and they gave up the hope of remaining.
Thank you for reading. So what we're starting with really is this idea that for the Jews, the Spanish Jewry in general, the Alhambra Decree was the final solution. That was their final solution. And although there are differences between the Alhambra Decree and the Nazi final solution, there are many critical similarities that we will see. But let's go. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to Torquemada. Let's unpack this story a little bit. Such a fun moment in history.
Hi, Leo.
We're in episode 14.
We're in episode 14. We're in 1492.
It's a pivotal year for everyone.
Pivotal year. The Jews are very comfortable. Many of them have converted. That's a first. And
yeah, it stopped being a little comfortable for some of the Jews.
But they were living. I mean, Spain was the height of civilization at the time. This is where it was going down.
It was like really the center of Jewish life for many years. Right, so many great sages, doctors, Maimonides, to name a few.
Big time.
Abarbanel, poets.
Of course, this is when
thought leaders.
Columbus set sail for America, right? At the same time, right?
Yeah. By the way,
pivotal time for humanity.
Yeah, funny note, the Columbus's navigator was a Jewish guy.
Jacob Schwartz?
And Cohen. And when they reached the shores of America, the first person to actually set foot was his guy. So the first word the Indians heard was "Shalom." We brought hummus.
Is that a true story?
So, that is true. I mean, everything except for the hummus. But it's amazing how these things just sneak into history. But we're digressing. This is on the one hand, a great time for Jews. It's a great time to be a Jew, to be alive in Spain.
Not in pain, in Spain, right?
In Spain, exactly. Yeah. Business is booming. Everything is great on the one hand. On the other hand, these mass conversions are happening. For the first time, in all earnest, Jews are choosing that route, thinking that that's the problem, right? That they could get so much more ahead. They could avoid future calamities by simply becoming like everyone. But for some reason, that's the paradox we talked about last episode, it only increases the ire of the surrounding Christians, because now they think, oh, we're dealing with crypto Jews, these hidden Jews that we can't tell who they are, and they're going to secretly pull Christians to their Jewish world, and they're going to pull the Jews who already converted back into Judaism. So you have all these...
Leo, until this time that we're living in now, and after the temple, so to speak, it was really a tough go for these Jews, because they didn't have... Like, if they were Jews, they were persecuted. If they tried to intermingle, they were persecuted. They really didn't have an out.
When did Jews ever have an out? Was there ever an out?
There's a hypothesis here that if the Jews unite, right, if they stay ahead, what this thing that we've been seeing happening, this pattern that we've been seeing happening, is every time a civilization is peaking, right? We went through this, I said this like 20 times already, from Babylon to Egypt to Rome to Greece, right? Every time there's the Jews alongside the growing civilization, and if they're not ahead of it, it's uncomfortable, right? They deal with some kind of calamity. So, but they don't have they really don't have a way yet of really doing it even.
That's a question. I mean, look, I can't speak for Jews who lived back in Spain. You can't really judge someone until you walk a mile in their shoes. But the hypothesis is that by sticking to the ideal of unity, to the ideal of love, that is the glue, that is that faith, that is the ideology that keeps the Jews safe, secure, beloved, adored, appreciated by their neighbors, all of that. It's when they're trying to sort of move away from that unwittingly, just trying to be more like everyone else, maybe. That's when we get this reaction, this extreme reaction from the surrounding environment. We get that reaction from sometimes our very own people, like we see with those conversos. We read about him in the last episode, and Torquemada is simply he's like the cherry on top, because he comes from a family of conversos, and he himself is the one who basically sealed the deal on the expulsion of the Jews.
It seems to me, though, it's like occurring to me as we're going through the story, and we have read the book and talked about it many times, but we always keep saying, like, when they unite, so no enemy can harm them. But as we're going through it, and now that we get to Spain, and it's so clear, and it's actually coming closer to us. I mean, not in our lifetime, but you can almost touch it. I mean, it's getting close, right? It's not some ancient history anymore, and you can almost start to relate to what's going on. I can relate to, growing up in a town with no Jewish people, and you're trying to, what am I? And you're trying to fit in, and you don't want to stand out, and it almost seems like they can't. The Jews as a mass are still in mid-process. Like, they almost couldn't do it yet. Like, I feel like we went through the book so far, saying, like, and look, they didn't do it again. Look, there they go again. They didn't do it again. But it's
we love to deliberate. That's what we like to do. We like to stew in it a little bit. Let's talk about it a bit, some more. Maybe we can get a second opinion, maybe a third opinion. I think it's part of our nature, but I feel that today is a time of action. Today is really a time of action. Maybe it got a little more foggy because of the coronavirus, which by the way, I'm still in Israel. You're still in Princeton. We're still trying to figure this out from afar. looking at what's going on in the world, this is not great. I mean, the fact that you have people who oppose the shelter-in-place ban, and they do it using swastikas and pictures of the governor of California with the Hitler mustache. I mean, there's so many great dictators. Why this guy? Like, why particularly that streak of totalitarianism? Why that made it into the public space? Why people are still angry about Jews? Somehow the Jews are in the midst of it all the time, never leaving.
What is occurring to me as we're reading the story now about this and thinking of, I mean, it's the same again. You know, I don't want to make parallels and say that, Jared Kushner is Joseph or is some kind of, Torquemada. Not at
you can
some
say
kind
Bernie
of,
Sanders. Bernie Sanders. You can say Bernie Sanders.
Okay, not at some degree that you can understand who all these incarnations of each one is throughout the stories. But it seems like today, it's like we have the opportunity now to do it. And in the past, they didn't. It was like setting the blueprint, really, that I don't know how to say it in another way, the plan. But now from where we are, we can see the whole plan. We see the process, and now it's in our hands.
That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make people see that all these points add up to a pattern that you can observe in history, and maybe observe it today as well. Which is why we want to go into the story of Torquemada and see the last act in that story, because I think it's very relevant. If I read this correctly, when we're reading this chapter about Torquemada, and the king and the queen are ready to sign the decree, and then the Jewish community tries to send them some money, like, look here, keep us, please, here's some money. And the guy, Torquemada, just dashes into the royal room and throwing the crucifix. And is this what you're going to do? Judas sold Jesus for this much money, and you're going to sell him for that much money? I think by that point in time, it was already done. It was sealed. It's like
tell me about this Alhambra decree.
The system. Well, we'll get there. I'm just saying that the system, I feel like when we're reading this, the system has already reached the breaking point. Mm. You know how like when it's...
like when nature puts everyone back in their houses, when there's a global pandemic?
There's that. I'm thinking more like when a couple finally reaches a point where, like, we can't do this. We have to either get a divorce, or the wife stabs the guy in the eye with a pair of scissors or something. It's too much. It's too extreme. The tension is too big. The gap is irreconcilable. You have to separate the parts and then bring them back together. I think that's what's happening, right? If I see the book, we're given a chance to do it. We don't do it. It gets worse and worse and worse. Then boom, breaking point, siege, war, exile. We get another opportunity. Again, we don't do it. Pogroms, conversions, pogroms, expulsion. We get a chance to do it. We don't do it. It's a process. We always pay attention at the end. You always notice. Don't you you only notice that you're speeding when the cop stops you? Right. It's too late by now. By then, that's it. You have to pay the price. So I love the fact that you're reading. And they try to stop the expulsion, despite Torquemada's intervention. And Queen Isabella told the representatives of the Jews that the king's heart is in the hands of the Lord. The Lord put this thing
into the heart of the king.
Right, as the river of water, He turns it wherever He wills. Do you believe that this comes upon you from us? The Lord has put this thing into the heart of the king. So, yeah, you could say, oh, this is just religious mumbo jumbo or whatever you want to say, but this was actually the thing that she felt compelled to say to the representatives of the Jews. So it's the same thing. I think we tend to be blind to what nature is trying to tell us.
There's something, I see it so clearly. I see it so clearly in people that they're like, it'll never happen here.
Yeah.
there's we're too economically strong. We're too, Jews are too close to the president. We have Israel. It'll never happen here. Like, I hear it today. I hear it like as recently as like a week, 2 weeks ago. People cannot like bring themselves to feel this pattern, to see that it's like, it was like,
yeah, and then when it happens, it happens so systematically, so methodically. I think about it. I think of that line from the beginning of the episode, that this was the final solution, just like those the Nazi laws and everything that ensued. Right, that was very meticulous about what Jews can do, what they cannot do, the jobs they can have, who they can marry. Right, those race laws. The same thing, when you read about the Alhambra Decree, it's very formal. It's almost like a business statement. It's
so the Alhambra Decree was something that Torquemada put into place?
No, it's what the king and queen put into place.
Decreed, okay.
Yeah, it says, Don Ferdinand, maybe you should read it. Don Ferdinand, page 94 in the middle there. Read how it starts. It's very nice. It's very official. It's almost like a wedding invitation.
It doesn't sound hateful, but it sounds rather quite pragmatic, more like a legal notice. The included translated excerpts quoted from the meticulous work of Dr. David Raphael convey how banal horror can sometimes sound. It begins very politely. Don Ferdinand and Donna Isabel, by the grace of God, King and Queen of ... naming all the kingdoms over which they ruled. And from there, the decree goes on to name all the people to whom it's meant to be delivered, Count and Countess of Barcelona, okay. And many others. They even address formally Prince Don Juan, our dear and beloved son. And from there, the decree goes on to address nearly every class, title, and occupation in the country. Finally, the edict addresses the Jews directly and in such a practical manner that does not even begin a new sentence.
Quote,
and bishoprics.
Yeah, bishoprics.
And dioceses. What does that mean?
Yeah, dioceses.
These are certain...
There's a religious
areas. Okay.
Areas, exactly.
And to the communities of the Jews, of the said city of Burgos, and to all the cities and villages of the places of our said reigns, and to all the Jews and their singular persons, thus men and women of whatever age, and to other persons of whatever legal status,
dignity or prominence, or condition to which that contained below in our letters, pertains or may appertain in any manner.
Okay, grace unto you. Okay, so they said to every class of people in every place, health and grace unto you. And after the cordial address...
So it addressed everyone and then addresses the Jews, right? And then they explain the crimes of the Jews.
The king and the queen explain the crimes of the Jews, namely that they think the Jews are trying to draw conversos back to Judaism. Quote, we were informed that in these, our kingdoms, there were some bad Christians who Judaized and apostatized from our holy Catholic faith, this being chiefly caused by the communication of the Jews with the Christians. We ordered that the said Jews be separated in all the cities, villages, and places of our kingdoms, and that they be given Jewish quarters and separate places where they could live, hoping that this separation would remedy the problem. Moreover, we have sought and given the order that an Inquisition be conducted in the said kingdoms, which has been done and is continuing, and on account of it, many guilty individuals have been found, which is notorious. It is evident and apparent that the great damage to the Christians has resulted from, and does result from, the participation, conversation, and communication that the conversos have with the Jews, who try to always achieve by whatever ways and means possible to subvert and draw away faithful Christians from our holy Catholic faith and separate them from it.
Right. And it continues, but then initially they didn't even plan to expel the Jews. If you read from Notwithstanding that, we were informed of most of this beforehand, and realizing that the true remedy for these injuries was in breaking of all communication of the said Jews with the Christians, and to eject them from our kingdoms. We sought to content ourselves in ordering them out of all the cities and villages of Andalusia, where it appeared that they had done great damage.
believing that this would be sufficient, so that the other cities and villages and places of our kingdoms would cease to do and commit the aforesaid. And because we were informed that neither that nor the punishments meted out to some of those Jews found culpable in the said crimes and transgressions against our holy Catholic faith will suffice as a complete remedy to obviate and terminate such a great opprobrium. I can't believe you're making me read all this.
Yeah.
Therefore, with the counsel and advice of some prelates, grandees, and cavaliers of our kingdoms, and other persons of knowledge and conscious of our counsel, which one of them is Torquemada,
the prominent of whom was Torquemada,
having had much deliberation upon it, resolved to order all and said Jews and Jewesses out of our kingdoms, and that they never return nor come back to any of them.
Boom. The end. And it continues, and they forbid them from returning and incur penalty of death. But what I find interesting is that when you speak to a religious person who has anti-Semitic sentiments, like the conversation I've had with E. Michael Jones, for example, they really do feel that the Jews are somehow robbing them of their values. They somehow distract them, somehow taken away from their moral foundation. And you know, I love the Hollywood movie like the next person, but there's no question that something has happened in this country, in this culture, as a result of the introduction of this extreme Hollywood culture, that you cannot say that it made the country better, right? Just to put it mildly, you can't say that Hollywood made America better.
Okay, but here's the thing that's been on my mind this whole episode. I don't think that those Jews who run Hollywood, for example, they know any better. Like maybe somehow there's some. It's not like they know.
That's a different story. But that's a different story.
How can you hold them responsible if they don't even know?
I'm not holding them personally responsible. I'm saying that I feel it on myself that I'm like at the end of a chain of people who've been, you know how your kid is about to break something and you warn them once, you warn them twice, you warn them a third time. By the time it happens, you have no choice. You have to take him, put him in their room, apply some punishment, right? It's like, so you can say, well, he didn't know any better. What are you talking about? He was forewarned like 60 times. My son just destroyed the vase in this house where we live, and I've seen that vase in my mind breaking, shattering, and so it was just a matter of time.
And I guess in that sense, if these Hollywood Jews understood, but which they didn't clearly enough, they didn't have any recollection of the love and the connection. But if they knew about what happened in Spain and what happened in Greece and what happened in Persia and what happened in Rome and then presumably they would have some responsibility and create content to bring to unite people instead of things that divide people.
You could say that it didn't have a podcast warning them about the dangers of disunity in the old days.
Hopefully they hear this one and start to make content.
They probably sent letters, but nobody read them. Right?
Hopefully they start to make
Did you read that letter about unity? Yes. I don't know, Seth. We're trying. We said that we want to uproot this phenomenon, and we're trying. But someone has to listen. Someone has to say, you know what? Yeah, dang it. We're going to try. Let's try. Remember we said, I think a few episodes ago, we said, let's try. Let's have a year of unity. Not, International Day of Kindness like we have once a year. Let's do it a year of kindness. Let's see how that works. What do you say?
Here's an excerpt from page 50 of my book. Never in history have Jews been in a better position to fulfill our role. We are embedded in every corner of American life. We're entrenched in film, music, politics, banking, healthcare, technology, social media, law, medicine, and all of the mediums that determine public discourse and public opinion. Jews can spread a message of love and unity throughout the entire world.
Thank you. You see, that's a message I hope some people in power here. They had they wrote the Council of the Elders of Zion 100 and something years ago and spread that, and everybody was like, no, that's insane. Why would Jews sit in secrecy and conspire to take over the world? And I say, well, you already have the means to change the world. So why don't you sit and conspire to do it for the good?
For the good.
I want you to read.
As in antiquity, the Spanish Jews suffered because of their lack of unity. Their attempts to convert inflicted on them the Inquisition, which ended with all Jews and untrustworthy conversos being expelled from Spain or slain. As in antiquity, by the time calamity struck, the level of animosity between Jews and conversos and the mistrust of the Spaniards towards Jews and conversos alike were too intense to overcome. It is hard to place a finger on the point of no return, but beyond a certain level of internal alienation among the Jews, the wheel cannot be turned back. As Gerber woefully notes, unfortunately, the persistent and growing anti-Jewish sentiment across the land could not similarly succeed in melding the Jews into one strong communal organization. Some 450 years later, we will see the same scenario unfolding in Nazi Germany, but with far more tragic consequences than the outcome of the disunity of the Spanish Jewry, and in fact, far worse than anyone could have imagined until it actually happened.
That's the problem. When we wake up, it's always a little too late. But
a soundbite of you, man.
We're not self-hating Jews. We're not trying to stir up anti-Semitism. We're actually trying to solve it. Believe it or not,
it's a big problem. Okay, and we need time to talk about it. This is not a soundbite solution here. This is openly, right? We need to be able to discuss honestly what's going on safely together. And this is not I'll say it again, it's not a soundbite fix here. It's not a one-line thing and then it's over. We really need to understand the exact same patterns repeating over and over again, and how do we break that cycle and rise? Yeah.